allow me to introduce our speaker this morning. Today we'll hear from Mr. Samuel Adams, who is the Director of Technology and Chair of the Computer Science Department here at Blair. Mr. Adams came to Blair in 1995, making this his 21st year at our school. And during this time, Mr. Adams has worn many hats. He's taught physics, pre-calculus, algebra, programming, computer-aided design, computer applications, robotics, and advanced placement computer science. He also runs the lap swimming program in the fall. And importantly, it should be noted that Mr. Adams and his team in the technology department, they're a big reason we have such a reliable internet service at our school. So no small feat. Finally, being here for as long as Mr. Adams has, as you might imagine, he has heard many chapel speeches. In fact, last week when we talked, he mentioned to me that he's heard all but 5 chapel talks that have been given here at Blair since he arrived at our school in 1995. So this morning's talk will be Mr. Adams' 4th such chapel talk. Before he takes the stage, though, Mr. Adams thought it appropriate to begin with a poem that many of you may be familiar with. So Miss Lizzie Devlin has offered to read it for us this morning, and Mr. Adams will follow. So please join me in welcoming Lizzie, and after her, Mr. Adams.
Taken by Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, and leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference.
I'd like to talk to you today about making good choices. In thinking about this topic, I was reminded of a story. The senior schoolmaster was a wise, friendly old man. One day, a bright, ambitious student asked, "Sir, what's the secret of your success?" He smiled and he said, 2 words, good decisions. But how do you make good decisions? He thought about it and he said 1 word, experience. But how do you get experience? And then he looked sad and he said 2 words, wrong decisions. I'd like you to imagine with me a few scenarios here at Blair in which you might have moments in which you have to make good or bad decisions. Scenario 1, you're walking by an open door in a dormitory. You see a brand new iPod Shuffle sitting on the desk right inside the door. You realize that you could easily pick it up and put it in your pocket without anyone seeing it. It's small, it looks just like every other iPod Shuffle. Nobody will ever know that you took it. Scenario 2, you're with a group of friends who are saying unkind things about a new student who isn't present. The new student is trying to fit in, but is socially awkward, and often inadvertently says embarrassing things. You know that if you make a disparaging remark at the student's expense, you'll get a good laugh from your friends. Scenario 3, your grades take a dip in one of your classes. In the middle of an important test, the teacher leaves the room to use the restroom. There's one important thing you can't quite remember. Your cell phone is in your pocket, and your study materials already have the answer loaded on the screen. You're sure that you can take a quick peek at it, and nobody will notice. You might be thinking at this point, I know what you're going to say, Mr. Adams. There's an obvious right decision in each of these. You're clearly about to tell us not to steal, not to be cruel to others, and not to cheat. That being the case, perhaps, let me try to turn things around by instead suggesting some very wrong decisions to each of these scenarios. First scenario, stealing the iPod. You're thinking too small. If you're going to be a thief, think big. Recruit other students who are willing to serve as your minions. Have them scour the campus at every available opportunity. Create an online storefront on eBay to roll over your ill-gotten gains into liquid capital. Continue expanding your vast underground empire until nothing remains of Blair but a smoldering ruin. Then move on to your next conquest. Second scenario, being unkind to another student. Popularity is everything. If you can't think of something unkind to say about someone else, make something up. After all, you can't push yourself up without pushing other people down. Crush all who might stand between you and your rightful place at the top of the social pyramid. Third scenario, cheating on a test. Remember, if you waste time studying, you'll only end up being well educated. Who wants that? Always look for the easy way out. This is the digital era. Make identity theft work for you. At the end of your Blair career, simply have your name legally changed to be the same as somebody who actually did all of their work. Apply to college as that person. I'm very much hoping that at this point your conclusion won't be, wow, Mr. Adams just gave me some fantastic ideas. The truth is that in life, things aren't always clear-cut or black and white. Sometimes we have to make choices about things which have both pros and cons. Sometimes it's not easy to know what the right choice is. Sometimes it's not easy to make the right choice, even when we think we know what the right choice is. As I was writing this talk, I asked myself, what was the most difficult choice I ever had to make? I'm a fairly private person. I don't often volunteer information about myself. But I'd be lacking credibility unless I was willing to share something that was a little bit personal. So I'm going to tell you a story about me and about a difficult choice I once had to make. As Mr. Powell mentioned, I've been teaching at Blair now longer than any student here has been alive. In all those years, I've never told anyone this story until now. I'm sure that we will keep it in confidence, you, me, and the other 500 people in this room. During my high school years, I enjoyed, by most standards, a good deal of success. I was the captain of the golf team, the captain of the swim team. I was ranked competitively in swimming on the state level. I held a leadership position in several student organizations. I had leading roles in several plays. I spent my summers rowing. I did well academically, and I was the salutatorian in a graduating class of over 1,000 students. I had the highest SAT score in the school in memory, as my college counselor insisted on telling me, more times perhaps than was really good for me to hear. Gosh, Mr. Adams, I hear you thinking. So far, the point of the story seems to be that you're really kind of full of yourself. Well, not so much now, but at that point in my life, I was indeed overconfident. I also used to try to jockey for popularity by doing funny voices. I still do Kermit the Frog once a year from the students in my class. I promised my students a few years ago that the next time I gave a chapel and I was standing in front of the entire student body, I would do it. And so, even though this has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of making good choices, I'm shamelessly digressing in a transparent effort to keep you entertained. Here it is, Mr. Adams, randomly and unexpectedly, doing the voice of Kermit the Frog in the middle of chapel. Hi-ho, this is Kermit the Frog, here with a fast-breaking Muppet News Flash. Hey, Dee. Thanks.
There we go.
During those same years, I got my first computer, which is now on display in my classroom. I would love for you to stop by and see it. I love to show it to students. It was a big deal back then. Most people didn't own computers. I taught myself to program it, and I was so passionate about it that I decided to pursue computer engineering as a career. The media was abuzz with stories about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who founded Apple Computer in their garage. My plan was to get a degree in the computer field and then to head out to Silicon Valley to join what was then being called the microcomputer revolution. I was accepted to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a well-known engineering school in upstate New York. At the age of 17, I headed off to a life of exciting challenges and new opportunities. Things didn't quite go as planned. At the beginning of my second year in college, when I was 18, the members of my immediate family died. My childhood and my happiness died with them. I can say at this point in my life that learning how to cope with death is an inevitable and necessary part of life. Indeed, it's an important part of reaching maturity and adulthood. But at that point in my life, I had a very difficult time dealing with the loss. I was very close to my family, and I had a hard time seeing past my pain. I was determined to continue on with my studies, but somehow things started to unravel. My sleep patterns became erratic. I often went days at a time without sleeping at all. I began to have trouble focusing. I became increasingly forgetful. I realize now that I was going through a state of depression brought on by grief, which is a perfectly normal response to that type of a life event, especially at that age. But I didn't know it at that time. I should have talked to a counselor. I should have taken a leave of absence from the school until I was ready to return. But I made some bad choices. I decided to tough it out without talking to anyone. I thought I could solve my problem by simply working harder. My grades started slipping. I remember feeling that my life was like a car which I had just driven off a cliff. No matter how hard I tried to steer the car, it was only going to go in one direction, straight down. I'm not somebody who is okay with failure. I'm not somebody who likes admitting that he has failed. But that year of my life, I positively, absolutely, and without mitigation, failed. At the end of the year, my grades were so low that I could no longer meet the criteria for staying at the college. The week after final exams, I received a letter from the school telling me that I wouldn't be able to continue my studies. I was heartbroken, and I was frightened. I met with a group of administrators at the school and made a plea for special consideration based on my circumstances. They were remarkably unsympathetic, but I was remarkably persistent. After several such meetings, they finally made a concession with strict terms. If I went to another college, took a full course load of technology-oriented courses for an entire year, and made straight A's consistently in every class, they would allow me to continue working on my engineering degree at Rensselaer. If I failed to meet any of these points in any way, they would deny me readmission and would refuse to consider the case further. It was obvious as I looked around the room that they were confident they would never see me again. My life had been derailed, but I took that shred of hope offered to me and I rebuilt my life around it. I didn't know what else to do. I enrolled in a year's worth of technical courses at the local community college. I worked a part-time job to make ends meet. It was a hard year. I was 19. I was very much alone. I didn't have anybody to fall back on. If things didn't work out, sink or swim, it was all on me. I was ashamed of my failure. I avoided all of my old friends. I didn't want them to know what had happened. I was supposed to be setting the world on fire in the world of computer engineering, but the reality was very different. I sat alone for hours every night, poring over my schoolwork, terrified lest I make that one mistake that would cost me my entire career. This is the part where we get to the difficult choice. Remember, the point was this is a story about facing a difficult choice? There's so much backstory there, I sort of forgot it myself. Well, we finally got there. A friend of mine from high school was working in one of the offices at the school at which I was now doing my coursework. we fell into the habit of frequently having lunch together. As time went on, she managed to slowly wring my story out of me. And then, in the middle of the year, she said something I wasn't expecting. "You know, Sam, I work in the office which sends out transcripts. I pull up the records on the computer. I print it out on special school stationery. I stamp the document with the school stamp, and I send it sealed off in official school envelopes. If you want, I could print out a special transcript for you, with all the grades you need, and send it off to Rensselaer. We never get callbacks from schools about such things. I'm sure nobody would ever know." I'd like to say that I was shocked and morally outraged and immediately said no. I'd like to say that, but instead I thanked her for her kindness and I told her I'd have to think about it. Boy, did I ever think about it. I wanted to say yes so badly. I rationalized it every way imaginable. It wasn't my fault. I had had a tough time. The school should have been more sympathetic. If I didn't do it, I might not finish college. I might never get a decent job. I might live my entire life without being able to make very much money, and so on and so forth. The chance to fix it all was right in front of me. Even though I was a very moral person, even though I knew that falsifying a transcript was clearly wrong and against everything that I believed, I wrestled with the choice as I had never wrestled with anything in my life. In the end, the choice I made was to say no. I knew that if I didn't, every time I faced a challenge after that, I would hear a little voice in the back of my mind saying, "You're not really up to this. You couldn't handle it back then without cheating. You won't be able to this time either." I don't want you to think that your director of technology is unqualified for his job. So I will tell you briefly, I ended up making the grades I needed under my own merits. I returned to Rensselaer to complete my coursework. I had a successful academic career, and I ended up finishing not one, but 2 degrees while I was there. But the experience had changed me. Instead of going to work in the computer industry as planned, I chose to come work here at Blair. I had developed a deep reverence for the value of education. I felt this was a place where I hoped I might be able to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others. The difficult choice I made when I was 19 was a part of a series of choices which ultimately led to me being here today. You will face your own difficult choices today, tomorrow, next year, 4 years from now. I don't know what they will be, but I know they're coming. I can't tell you today what the right choices in your life will be, but I'd like to give you a few suggestions to think about for when those moments come. Practice speaking the truth. Being consistently truthful is something that requires practice. When we learn to speak truthfully to others, we learn to be truthful to ourselves, and that leads to better choices. Avoid doing things or saying things simply to gain the favor of your friends. Seek long-term respect rather than short-term popularity. In Frost's poem, it was the road less traveled that made all the difference. Often, it's the less popular or more difficult choice which turns out to be the better one. Treat others as you would have them treat you. Being respectful and kind to others almost always leads to good choices. By thinking about the happiness of others, we are more likely to find it ourselves. Be respectful of others' properties. If it's not yours, don't take it. Don't borrow it. Don't touch it without the permission of the owner. Practice making good choices in small things. When we develop the habit of doing the right thing day to day in small matters, it becomes easier to do the right thing when the big matters come along. Choose role models. Choose people that you deeply respect. When you have a difficult choice, think about what decision they might make and why. Think about the long term. Are the consequences of your choice really worth it? Think about your health. Life gets much harder when you don't feel well. Exercise regularly. Get enough sleep. Avoid consuming substances recreationally. Your life will be much better later if you make that set of choices now. I dismissed the first three choices I described earlier, bullying, stealing, and cheating, as too easy, too obvious, things you don't really have to think about that hard. But in fact, they happen every year here at Blair. Every year, some students make bad choices in these matters. You have the chance now to make good choices when those moments come. I know most of you will never come before the Rules and Disciplinary Committee, but a few of you will. For those few, you have the opportunity now to make choices which will keep yourself from ending up in that position, keep yourself from being suspended, keep yourself from being expelled. Your future, your destiny, will be shaped by the choices which you make. Make choices which will help you become who you really want to be, that will take you where you really want to go. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Seniors first.